Hi, it's story time again. Are you ready for another tale? Wonderful. Will you settle down? Close your eyes and listen, and I will read for you The Sparrow and the Fairy. A fairy once stood by the seashore, watching the foam as it dashed upon the beach, when an ocean bird caught her up in its beak and flew with her far away over the waters. They came at last directly above the deck of a vessel, and one of the mariners, seeing a black speck in the sky, discharged a musket, which so frightened the bird it let the fairy drop down onto the ship. But while she was falling, she had the precaution to take the form of a sparrow to conceal herself. The sailors gathered round and wondered to see a sparrow so far away from land, and one of them was going to fling it overboard, when a little cabin boy ran forward and begged that it might be given to him, which was done, and he ran with the panting, trembling thing into the storeroom, where, amid the boxes and hampers of provisions, he made his poor bed of straw and a blanket. He found an empty orange box, placed a little nest of wool in the corner of it, in which he put the sparrow, and then went out again to his work, but came in often during the day to see how it was getting along. At night he drew it up to his own bed, and was just going to sleep when out of the box sprang the prettiest lady in green, about 6 inches high, that you ever saw in your life. The boy got up and opened his eyes in wonder, and she came and sat down on his bed by him. Then he looked into his box, and missing his sparrow, burst into tears. When she asked him what was the matter, he told him that he cried because his sparrow had gone, and in a twinkling the little lady had vanished, and the sparrow was in its nest, as snug and warm as before. The next day, every chance he could get, he would be running in to look at his sparrow, and when night came again and the door was fastened, out jumped the little lady in green, who came and played nice little games with him, and told him wonderful stories, and so fond did he grow of her that he did not mind that the sparrow had disappeared as soon as the little green lady came. He used so often to run into his room to talk with her that it began to be remarked on by the sailors that the boy who was always before on deck was now moping down in the cabin by himself, and they resolved to watch him and see what he did there. So one of them stood by the door when he entered, and when it was shut, he thought he heard voices talking, and peeping through the keyhole saw a little green lady dancing over the boxes as light as a feather. He told this to the others, and they determined to find out the truth. So they burst open the door suddenly and went in. But nothing was to be seen of the lady in green, or anything else but the boxes, the little boy, and the sparrow in his warm nest. So after speaking roughly to the little fellow, all the sailors went out, no wiser than they came in. But from this time his mates began to look on him with distrust and suspicion, though before a favourite he came to be much disliked by them, and they were very unkind to him. But the boy did not mind, so long as he had such a good friend as the fairy. But one night a dreadful storm arose, so that they could no longer guide the vessel. They all declared the boy was the cause of their trouble, that he dealt in witchcraft and must be thrown overboard, or the ship and all in it would sink. Notwithstanding that, he begged them, with tears pouring down his cheeks, to spare him. They were so hard-hearted as to pay no attention to his beseeching tones, and when he found that they were in earnest, he only asked them to let him go into his berth for a few minutes to say his prayers, to which they consented. He then took his sparrow and put it in his bosom, that it might not be ill-treated after he was gone, and went out to them. A great rough sailor instantly seized him, and flung him with a whirl over the side of the vessel. For a moment he hung above the glittering waters, that dashed and foamed and yawned, as if to swallow him alive. Then he shut his eyes and felt the cold waters rush and close over his head, and down, down into the darkness he kept sinking, sinking, till he heard the sea monsters dash past him, and expected every moment to be devoured by them. But no, he escaped them all, and kept on falling down, down. At last he seemed to slip out of the water, as it were, into clouds, and then into clear air, and hung for a moment suspended in the sky, till he came plump onto very softest, greenest turf, which yielded beneath him like a bed. He was not at all hurt, and getting up, looked around bewildered, till feeling something stir in his bosom, he opened his vest, and out hopped the little green lady, and stood before him. "Now," said she, "I can repay you for all your care of me. I am a fairy, and this is one of my homes. I can show you in a moment many of my kindred." So saying, she blew a little bugle at her side, and many, like herself, began to flock about and to welcome her home. She gave command to them to bring some food, and directly these busy little people went to work and spread on a little rocky table the snowiest of cloths and the most beautifully delicious repast. After his hunger had been satisfied, the lady pointed to the sky and said, "Above those clouds lies the sea, through which you have just now passed. This is what you call the bottom of the ocean, where dwell mermaids, sea nymphs, and fairies." The boy looked up and wondered what had prevented the ocean from coming down upon his head, and then reasoned to himself if that was not also a great sea, which he had called the sky over his mother's cottage, and if that was not where all the rain came from. But he did not think long about this, for the fairy had such great sights to show him as he had never even dreamed of before. The houses were formed of coral and pearls, and instead of glass, the windows had large slabs of pure diamond to admit the light. The very pebbles under his feet were the most costly jewels, and the sun shining on them dazzled his eyes so that he could scarcely see. The fairy had a splendid mansion constructed for the boy, and a chariot made of shells, and little fairy horses, so small that it took 6 of them to draw him. He had servants to wait on him. His table was supplied every day with the most luscious fruits. He heard the sweetest music, The fairy herself used to spend most of her time with him, yet she noticed that he was often silent and sad. One day she found him weeping and begged him to tell her the cause of his grief, if there was anything yet wanting to complete his happiness. The boy dried his tears and answered her, "Dear little lady, I have everything that heart can desire. Fairies to wait on me and anticipate my wishes. Nothing to do but to amuse myself from morn till eve. But when I am enjoying all these things, my heart goes back to my poor widowed mother, who used to be always toiling for me, and I think that perhaps she is even now sick or starving for want of proper food. While I am idling here, she may be wearing herself out in labour for the support of my dear little brother, whom I long to see again. And even if she has been provided with the necessities of life, I am sure that her heart is sad, for she must most likely think that I am drowned in the sea, and that I shall never again return to her. Do not then be astonished if, in the midst of all this beauty and my good fortune, I am sad and I weep." The fairy answered him, "You are a good child not to forget your poor mother, and though I should be glad to have you remain with me forever, yet I can well see that you would be happier to be with her and your little brother. Stay here at least a year, then I will find means to send you to her." "Oh, thank you," cried the boy. "But my dear little lady, if you can send me home a year hence, you must be able to send me now. Who knows but my mother may die of grief or of starvation long before that? Oh, if it is not asking too much, let me go at once." The fairy then looked very sad, and told the boy that after his return to earth and to his mother, she would never again be able to reveal herself to him in her own proper shape, or make herself known to him. The boy was sad to learn this, yet still he begged to go to his dear mother. Then the fairy, though so sorry to part with him, told him that he should see his home that very night, and accordingly, when evening came, the fairy and himself were taken in the arms of a mermaid and carried up through the sea till they rose upon the surface, and he saw the stars and the blue sky above, and knew that they were the same stars and sky that shone over his mother's cottage. Soon they reached land, and the mermaid left them upon the shore, and the fairy, beckoning to a swan that was in sight, mounted with the boy on its back as it stood by her side. She and the little boy rose high up into the air and were borne swiftly above towns, cities, mountains, rivers, and valleys. At last, as the shades of night were passing away and morn began to break, the scenes became more familiar to him, till the fairy, pointing beneath them, showed him the woods and the hills amid which he knew was his own little home. At her signal the swan gently descended, and the boy's heart bounded lightly as he felt his feet once more rest upon the firm ground, and looking around on a scene so familiar and so dear. But his gladness left him when the fairy said, "We must here part. Never again shall I be permitted to reveal myself to you, but nightly, though unseen by you, I shall visit this spot. When all goes well with you and your mother, and everything prospers to your wishes, think that the fairy has been here and at work." Before the boy could speak to her, she gently kissed him, and bidding him adieu, mounted again on the back of the swan, high in the air, and waving farewell with her hand as she was lost in the distant cloud, the boy saw her no more. He stood gazing forgetfully after she had disappeared, and then, remembering himself, hastened on to the cottage. The blue smoke was struggling up the chimney, and he knew that the morning fire was kindled. The old brindled cow stood before the door, and his mother, with the milk pail in her hand and her little child toddling beside her, came forth without seeing him, and began to seat herself to milk. The little boy, however, espied him, and cried out, "Oh, brother, brother!" The mother started up, and seeing the well-known features of her son, burst into tears as she clasped him to her heart. He was as one restored from the dead, for the wicked crew who had returned home from the ship reported that he had fallen overboard and was drowned. But her joy was now full, and she found that he was never going to leave her again. During the winter nights, as they sat by the fireside, he used to tell her and his little brother all about the good fairy and the wonders that he had seen. And when the harvest came, and they gathered in a full crop of corn and fruit, their neighbours' crops had all been blighted, he used to say to his mother, "The fairy has surely been here." And as everything worked to their advantage, and they were well provided for, they never forgot her or her promise to him. Peaceful slumbers. Sleep sweet.